Hey friends, I'm Amy, a health coach here at Flip Your Leaf, and today we're talking about shutting down your stress cycle. So, when we experience day-to-day stress, your boss yelling at you, traffic, just all of the commotion with kids and jobs and IBS and just being a person in a body, all of these things that sort of trigger that stress response. And like we know from the gut-brain axis that stress in our brains can turn into stress in our guts and vice versa. And so none of these things are good for your IBS. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was how we stop this stress cycle, because even after the cue has been dealt with, our bodies don't always, close that cycle. We don't stop the stress response in our bodies. And part of this is because the mechanism or trigger for this is our critter brain. So we have three parts of our brain, for the context of what we're talking about, and that is our conscious brain, which is sort of where we live, we talk, we think, we have ideas. There's our limbic system, which is sort of where our feelings live and are generated. And then there's our lizard brain or our critter brain. And this is sort of this, really old part of our mechanism that is in charge of keeping us alive and keeping us safe, and Lord help you, it'll do whatever it needs to get that done. And so you are in a stressful situation, this part of our brain developed when it was mostly like bears and lions and things like that. And so what it does is it triggers a huge response in the body where, our heart is beating really fast and, all of these chemicals are rushing into our muscles to give us kind of superhuman strength, and all of the blood is being diverted from our digestive tract because we don't need to be digesting stuff if we're going to be dead in a minute. And so our body is, using all these chemicals and mechanisms to make sure that we can outrun something if that's possible, or we can fight it off if we don't think we can get away. We might even freeze if, I'm too small to fight you and I'm too slow to get away from you. I might just play dead, and that's that freeze response. But our brain is, working overtime to try and keep us alive, and it doesn't really know the difference between, a lion trying to maul us to death and your boss kind of chewing you out. It doesn't know the difference between walking to, a den of bears and traffic that's really frustrating to you, losing your passport right before you want to go somewhere. And so this cue, the thing that started this cycle of stress, and the actual cycle of stress in your body are quite different. And that's because your critter brain lives in a bit of a submarine. And so it kind of only has access to the information that's available to it through your body, so your body's experience. And so, even though your boss has finished yelling at you, or, you've put your kids to bed, or your IBS symptoms have kind of calmed down for the day, your heart rate's still maybe going fast, and your muscles are still feeling kind of tight, and, you're still breathing very shallow, which is a cue for anxiety, a cue for stress. Your body is receiving all of this information, and your little critter brain, which kind of lives in a little submarine, only has those dials to go off of. And so it still believes that we're under stress, and it's still trying to protect us. It's still keeping that sympathetic nervous system activated, which is impacting our ability to do, our rest and digest functions, which isn't helpful for us. And so one of the ways that we can stop this cycle, sort of close that loop and say, okay, it's all right, we're safe now. You can turn this off and put us back in rest and digest, which is really where we should be living all of the time, is to do something, right? So the sympathetic nervous system, these flight or fight responses are meant to move us, are meant to help us take action. And so, in situations now where there are no bears, there are no lions, there's no action happening. And so there's nothing to actually turn that mechanism off in our bodies. And so it can be something like deep breathing, right? So one of the cues is we've got that shallow breath going so that we can just, run through, the field, or climb a tree, or whatever we need to do. And so taking that, nice, calm, deep breaths tells our bodies okay, we're calming down now. We don't need to run anymore. We've stopped now. We're safe now. It can be the same thing of jumping up and down, right? If our instinct is to run, going and doing some exercise, really getting that heart going, and sort of almost tricking your brain into thinking okay, we ran and we fought and we did those things and we're done now. And you can kind of simmer down. It can be just jumping up and down. It can be dancing really crazy. It can be taking yourself out for a run, or, doing some weights, or just some jumping jacks, or whatever you need to do to get your body moving, so that when you stop, your brain kind of does a reassessment and it says, okay, cool, we've stopped moving. our heart rate's coming down, our breath is coming down, everything is calming down. Like, I think it's okay if we flip back into rest and digest. It can also be something, if you've had a bit of an emotional stressor, like this is one of the reasons that I love watching super sappy rom-coms. There comes a minute where the tears go and it just feels like such a great release. And it's because I'm doing something, right? An action is happening that is sort of releasing that from my body, your body, and it's sort of telling your brain, like, it's cool, we're safe now. You can let go of that. That can come out now, and we can close that cycle for ourselves. And one thing that happens is that sometimes if we've had, a trauma or a really stressful event and we haven't closed that cycle, is that sometimes it just continues to cycle in our bodies. And we see that a lot with people who have chronic illnesses, who have chronic stress, is that there are several loops that are open in their bodies. And so sometimes you might find, I wake up and I'm just angry for no reason, right? And so we acknowledge I'm feeling angry, and how do I close that loop? I'm like deep cleaning, going out and just hauling stuff around in your garden. Like I said, going for a run, going for like a really intense walk, finding ways to let out those feelings. It's an action to sort of close that loop, and then that loop is closed. Right? And then we continue through our lives closing these loops and closing these loops. And, it might not be that, I started at a 10 and now I'm in a 1, right? That's not necessarily what we're going for, But if you sort of notice this loop that's open, right? Hey, like I found a loop and it's open, sort of taking action to be like, hey, here's a loop that I can close today. And, I was feeling at an 8, right? I was feeling a 9, and, I did some deep breathing. I did some jumping jacks. I really told my body, here is a motion, here is an action that is saying, this is done now, this is closed, you can archive this away, and we're going to be just fine. As those loops begin to close, you might find that your generic stress level, right, your baseline stress level starts coming down and down and down and down, and then other tools that you have in your IBS toolbox may become more effective for you. So this idea of closing these stress cycles, making sure I had a stressful event, how am I closing this for myself, right? Like the trigger is done, even if I've dealt with the trigger, how am I making sure my critter brain knows you can switch out of this fight or flight response, you can turn off that sympathetic nervous system, and you can flip us back to the rest and digest phase, because only one of those can run at a time. How do I tell my body what works for my body? What is an action that I can do to move myself into a response that closes this stress cycle? And the more that you can build it, it's a muscle, right? Like it's going to take a minute to sort of find your groove, find what activities work for you. I love weightlifting. I love running. I love dancing. Those really work for me. What works for you is going to be different. It could also be different on different days. Like it's important to understand what our bodies need, and you'll get more in tune with that the more you practice. It could be something like I need somebody to hug me really tight for a minute when I'm feeling really upset. My husband's really big. He's 6'5", and I'll just walk up to him and say, I need you to squeeze me. And I mean like squeeze. Like I want organs to be like coming out of my body. And just having that happen for a minute closes that stress cycle sometimes when it feels really, really big for me. And so sort of learning what your library is of tools for how do I close these loops that are happening in my body, it's really going to help you lower that baseline of stress that you're experiencing so that chronic stress becomes more manageable. And that can do things for you like make more room in your FODMAP buckets. That can do things like help you get better sleep. That can help you do things like, just have more energy in your life, have more mental bandwidth, have more space for other things that are important to you. And so it really is, mission critical that we start closing these loops as much as we can, because like I said, it's not like it used to be, right? Like the bear is gone. We're okay. I ran away. My body sort of got that out of its system. Now the stressors, we can't always even fix them, right? We kind of have to live through them. You can't cuss out your boss or anything like that. And so the solution isn't even always available to us, or when we do solve a problem, it doesn't always register for our critter brain living in that little submarine unless we feed it new information, if that makes sense. So that's all I have for today. If you want more information about, understanding your body, understanding IBS, maybe learning more about the low FODMAP diet, make sure you sign up for my free newsletter. You're going to get a ton of helpful information in there. There are lots of opportunities to come hang out with me in webinars, come hang out in my Facebook group. We have a ton of fun. I'm going to drop the link below. But that's it for today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video.